And even though in the course of being a journalist for 20 years, of course, I interacted rather intensely and rather personally, intimately with people who had terrible things happen to them, be it crime or fraud or war, I had not acquired my own kind of mental immune system to deal with the onslaught of a major trauma. And I'm not proud of this, but I did not handle it particularly well. Um, I spent a lot of time being racked with anxiety. I spent a lot of time being depressed. I spent a lot of time being angry, um, operating under the kind of false assumption that anger and other kind of ego affirming things are legitimate antidotes to things like fear and anxiety.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Welcome. Today, I have the honor of chatting here with Miguel Sancho, author, and my gosh, a whole bunch of other titles, producer. What other things, Miguel? What other, aside from author, father, we had probably other titles before you became an author. So, what were all these other titles you had?
Well, mostly I just have a profession. I'm a journalist, and I work in a couple different media, primarily television. This is my first book. I've done some print before. I've done some radio before, but yeah, my gig is being a television producer, and I have told lots of other folks' stories with certain degree of competence. And what this book was an attempt to kind of train some of those journalistic um, energies and skills on the experience of my family, and that's kind of how we came up with this book.
That's wonderful. And the title of the book is More Than You Can Handle: A Rare Disease, a Family in Crisis, and the Cutting Edge Medicine That Cured the Incurable. And this is my first time reading about this. And I took some notes, but I will have to like shift here with my word, pull them out and stuff. But we'll just have this conversation here. But I had never heard of this disease. So let's start off there. What was the situation that happened in your family that then led you to write this book about the story that Sebastian and you and Lydia and Felicia, your wife, and Lydia, your other daughter, and had?
Yeah. So there's the part of the story that's very specific and very narrow, which is always the case with rare diseases, and then there's the part that's much more general and broad that a lot more people can relate to. So the story goes like this: we were kind of a typical happy family. Um, Perceived ourselves to be kind of on an upward trajectory after having married and having our first wonderful daughter named Lydia, as you described. And we loved parenting so much, we wanted seconds. So we got pregnant again. Um, and in May of 2012, we were blessed with the birth of a baby boy named Sebastian. But about 7 or 8 weeks old, he started getting a series of very serious infections that nobody could really identify. That's not exactly true. They could identify, but they couldn't explain. Sorry. And as a result, we spent months going in and out of hospitals. Some of these infections required surgeries. And it wasn't until my wife, Felicia, kind of put her foot down and said, "This isn't just a string of bad luck. Um, I think something systemic is going on here." That we went to an immunologist who, after performing some rather good detective work and some rather thorough diagnostics, came back with the news, which was good in that it gave us clarity, and terrible in that it gave us, a devastating um, change of direction and upending of our entire lives. And that news was that our son had been born with a genetic mutation on his X chromosome that made it impossible for his immune system to fight off several bacterial and fungal pathogens um, for a variety of reasons. The disease is called CGD, which means
I know
chronic
I
gran.
couldn't pronounce that. Yeah, the that second part. That's why I was like, I wanted
Yeah,
you to say it because I could not pronounce the. And
you know
I'm
what?
actually, I have something in common with you. I'm actually have more in common with Mercedes, your nanny, than
Mm-hmm.
you with you. I'm from Colombia as well, like your nanny, Mercedes from the book.
De
Yeah,
veras,
I see, sí,
qué lindo.
señor. Yeah, and so you do
Gran
speak
placer
Spanish as
conocerle.
well. I know your parents are both Hispanic. I didn't know you spoke
Mm-hmm.
Spanish as well. So yeah, so can you pronounce the
Not easily. And frankly, that is the problem with all these rare diseases. Nobody's ever heard of them. Many of them are impossible to pronounce or to remember, and a lot of them don't even have names that relate logically to what is going on. So the disease is called chronic granulomatous disease, and it basically means some of your white blood cells, called neutrophils, go to the site of the infection and they try to fight it, but they can't. And so they just pile up there and they create these clumps called granulomas, and that's what the disease ultimately um, how it got its name. But the bottom line is, if you have CGD, it means you have to live your life in some form of quarantine, to use a term that we're all familiar with these
from yeah.
days. Not full on what we call kind of boy in the bubble situations and
Mhm.
circumstances, but you have to be very cautious of a whole variety of things that us people who don't have the disease can kind of don't consider threats at all. And they range from things like cut grass to wood chips and playgrounds to sand and sand pits to,
Every
of course, getting
childhood,
sick.
what a child
Yeah,
would actually be around. Yeah.
right. And so this is the part that I think a lot of your audience can relate to who've never heard of this disease, which is the news hits you, right? And you think your life is going in one direction and you've made plans for the future and you have this whole vision of how things are going to be. Of course, understanding that life is chaotic and everything can't be predicted or controlled, but you have to have some sense of order just to get through the day, right? And then something comes and just throws you overboard. That's the metaphor I use in the book,
Hmm.
right? I invoke the story of a passenger on a cruise ship who, in reality, fell off the cruise ship and found himself in the Gulf of Mexico, wondering how he got there and watching the cruise ship steam off on the horizon. And that's really the closest I can come to the kind of mental disruption that that news has on you. And then there's the emotional part and the psychological part. And
And you
that's what a
touch on
good,
all of those. And you
yeah,
touch on all of those in the book. And very candidly, I want to say, as the parts I've already read, and I am very grateful for that because to be vulnerable like that, it's not easy. But at the same time, I think that by doing so, so many other people that go through situations similar to what you're going through, when they read that book, they say, like, oh my goodness, I was not alone feeling this way when my child got diagnosed, or I was not alone. I'm not the only one, that's having dynamics, with different difficulties in my family dynamics because of how everybody copes with the stress and so forth. And that's one of the big things you touch upon in the book is the stress component. Correct?
yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I found when I started, kind of had an obligation to read lots of stories like this is that oftentimes, and I don't mean to criticize other people's stories, um, but they would often be told in the sequence of events that yes, things are fine, and then you get this terrible news, and of course it's devastating and crushing, and then people find these apparently bottomless reserves of strength and altruism and concern, and sometimes they find reserves of money to help fund research and things like that, and that's wonderful and that's great, and those stories need to be told and shared. They're very inspiring. But for a lot of us, we're not Bill Gates and we're not Mother Teresa. We're people, at least I don't say we, I. Let me talk about my own weaknesses here. Uh, I wasn't prepared for this. Okay, I hadn't had a um, super privileged lifestyle, but I had a lot of things break my way. I hadn't dealt with a capital T trauma in my past before. And even though in the course of being a journalist for 20 years, of course, I interacted rather intensely and rather personally, intimately with people who had had terrible things happen to them, be it crime or fraud or war, I had not acquired my own kind of mental immune system to deal with the onslaught of a major trauma. And I'm not proud of this, but I did not handle it particularly well. I spent a lot of time being racked with anxiety. I spent a lot of time being depressed. I spent a lot of time being angry, um, operating under the kind of false assumption that anger and other kind of ego affirming things are legitimate antidotes to things like fear and anxiety. And that sent me on this, whole other journey, um, because I had to stop making things worse. Um,
Hmm.
the situation was terrible. My family was in a state of crisis. And again, it's not easy for me to talk about. Um, it wasn't easy for me to write. The truth is, there were times when I made things worse and instead of helping. So the question is, how can you stop that? How can you stop creating hell on earth? How can you keep it together when you're in this situation without any bearings, without
Hmm.
any uh, guidance, and you have to do something that no baby book will tell you how to do,
Hmm.
which is how to
There's
watch
no
your child
manual.
suffer. There's no manual for how to watch your own child suffer. And I'm talking about not just a child that, breaks a leg in a car crash or something, which is obviously
Right.
terrible, but, you know, getting the news that for the foreseeable future and possibly forever, your child will have a severely restricted quality of life and possibly quantity of life.
When you heard that aspect, like as you even just saying the aspect of quantity, not just the quality, um, how did you guys or still wrap your head around that? And this story takes you through all the process, but how do you guys wrap your heads around that? And we know that life, we none of us live forever, but that fact of hearing diagnoses is like that, like how do you how do you deal with that as parents?
Yeah.
And you yourself,
So
since I'm
yeah.
talking, yeah, to you.
So for part of this book, I didn't just kind of tell my story because I'm not that interesting, but I talked to a lot of other families who had to deal with this because it is a singular thing, and I was just interested what kind of reactions and behaviors um, people have um, commonly. And of course, one of the first things is denial, right? You, with the case of a genetic immune deficiency, at first we kind of just resisted the diagnosis. We thought, the test must have screwed up somehow, and you must have got a false positive.
Hmm.
And the doctor was able to walk us through that and say no. Um, so we came around on that finally. Then you think to yourself, well, maybe this is something that could be treated with diet or some other kind of less intrusive or less um, life changing form of treatment. With immune
because
deficiencies,
because the form of treatment for this, as you were finding out, was bone marrow. That was the bone marrow transplant was what the right the
yeah,
solution. Yeah, okay. Just so that
yeah.
because we
But
haven't
when
mentioned that, so that if the listeners.
cer- certainly, so for your listeners, with this particular disease, you can live with it. There are people who do live with it, but that involves some of the environmental restrictions and lifestyle restrictions that can be very constricting depending on what variety of the disease you have, and it requires serious and ongoing, constant um, prophylactic medications, antibacterial, antifungal. There are certain special medications that work to a certain degree to help mitigate the severity and frequency of infections, but you can bank on having a life-threatening infection once every 3 years or so. And um, when the disease was originally diagnosed, it was called lethal disease, lethal chronic lymph disease, because um, people didn't live. Now they
Mhm.
can, thanks to some of the amazing advances in medicine and pharmaceuticals. But so that's one option. But there's only one true curative treatment, which is itself one of the most harrowing, lengthy, and risky medical procedures you can undertake, and that is a bone marrow transplant, or more technically called a hematopoietic stem cell transplant. Um, and so both of these choices were obviously just devastating. You don't want to have to make that kind of choice. You want to let the child, in fact, grow until they're of the age of consent and they can make the choice for themselves. The catch there is that the longer, with this particular condition, the longer you wait, the less likely it is that a transplant will be successful. Um,
Mhm.
the rates of success, at least at the time that we did it, the rates of success are significantly higher for kids of a younger age. So, like I said, we were kind of in denial. We didn't want to have to make these choices. We weren't equipped to make these choices. And, um, then of course, we made the terrible mistake of Googling the disease on the internet.
Oh,
And yeah, please,
Dr.
if I get,
Google, Dr. Google.
yeah, I I do not like putting myself in the position of giving unsolicited advice, but my goodness, if you're in a state of anxiety about a medical condition, Googling it can very easily make it 10 times worse. And that's
Mhm. That
that's
was
what
the
I
case
did.
for you guys. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And then, you know, it was just a long period of sleepless nights and crying, and even you're looking for some way to get back to normal. You're looking for something to hang your hat on and turn on. You're looking for a break, and we didn't get one for a long time. And I was trying to function. I was trying to compartmentalize, um, and some days I was okay at that, and some days I wasn't. Um, and that ultimately sent me on this whole other kind of journey to find some way to make sure that I could function.
Let's talk
And
about
that.
that. Let's
Mhm.
talk about that because I think that's one of the things I like to give the listeners is some of the ideas and like the tools that can be out there in any type of grief, journey and the tools that people use in that. So for you, it was a quest. You had your friend that suggested you go try what was meditation, was it that what
Mhm.
for what your was it Tim, did I remember the name, was it Tim, was that the
Dan
right
Harris.
name? Dan Harris. I knew it
Yeah,
was like a short
yeah. There's a
Dan, your friend Dan, that
yeah.
recommended you go check out some things. So talk a little bit about the different tools you use then when you were trying to manage your stress. You started kind of in the holistic way and kind of went into different areas. So what worked for you to handle the amount of stress and all these emotions during this time?
Right. So I want to answer your question robustly, but I also want to put a disclaimer, which is that
Yes.
I am I am I am not a thought leader in this field. I am a thought follower. Uh, there are things that I found that worked for me, um, which I'm comfortable to talk about and recommend
You
to
talk.
But I got to
Absolutely.
say,
This is all about you. This
knowing
is
what to
not
do,
about.
and then yeah,
Right. Everybody
um,
has their own choice, but it's good to hear what other people's journeys have
yeah,
been because one of the things that I realized too in your journey, the aspect of faith was one that was not necessarily one of your core things you held on to at the beginning. That was more Felicia's, right? A little bit more of
yes,
her,
yeah,
right? And
which
so
became an issue for us actually.
right. So
Um,
that right there, that contrast of the two of
mhm.
you kind of having different ways in which you were holding on to something. She had faith to hold on to, you didn't necessarily. So therefore, your search was different than what Felicia's was, as was Mercedes, the nanny, who was a big part of. Everybody
Yep,
kind of has their own way. So yes, please share candidly what was your journey.
right. So I needed help. Okay. It's a tough time to remember. I was having a very difficult time sleeping. I was having a very difficult time just holding it together, trying to be strong for my family, all that stuff. And and it was affecting everything. It was affecting my work. It was affecting my marriage. It was affecting my ability to be a good parent. So one of my good friends, yes, is a thought leader in the meditation space, and he introduced me to meditation, mindfulness meditation. As you might know, there's various kinds. There's TM, there's Zen, there's
Transcendental.
mindfulness practice,
Hmm.
all that stuff. And I started doing it, and I can assure you, there's people who do it much more seriously and much more regularly than I did. But I did find it helpful. It helpful on a number of levels. Helpful just to realize that you're not your thoughts. You are, and you're not your feelings. You are the being that experiences those thoughts and feelings. You don't have to. You need to accommodate them. You need to make space for them, but you don't have to identify with them. You don't have to let them define you. It's very easy also to, if you're not being mindful, to let your mind go in certain directions and down certain rabbit holes. And just taking the step and having the ability to say, hey, I'm having this feeling and it's leading my mind go down this rabbit hole is one simple but very crucial step towards not letting it um, let you spiral out of control. The other big takeaway that I got was this practice called metta, um, which is also known as loving kindness, and just trying to focus on wishing peace and wellness and love upon every living thing that you see, not just yourself, but including yourself, um, not just the people that you know and love, automatically, but every other living thing. And it sounds so hippy dippy, new agey, um, and there's nothing wrong with being hippy dippy and new agey. It's not necessarily how you know I, where I come from, kind of personality wise or background wise, but it worked for me just as a matter of, again, keeping myself in control, um,
Hmm.
and learning to respect other people's um, feelings and sensitivities and boundaries, because I needed that. I still need it. By the way, I can't say this enough. I'm still a work in progress. Okay, I am not the guru. I am the guy just trying to figure stuff out.
Hmm. As
Um,
we all are. Yeah,
yeah.
everybody is. I'm sure the
Um,
gurus still probably are still trying to learn themselves.
but what I did, and I think what I want to really convey to your listeners is, I found that the meditation helped me. And if I had done it more, if I had done it more seriously, if I'd really, really committed to it, I didn't have the time to do it, hours and hours a day. But I did it quite a bit every day for quite some time. It still wasn't cutting the mustard. I
Mm.
still, if I would get a certain setback, in fact, what happened was I had this sick, we had this sick child, Sebastian, but we also had the healthy child, our daughter, Lydia. So about a year after the diagnosis with Sebastian, Lydia had a health issue. Now, it was a relatively minor health issue, not life threatening.
The
But the
spot,
point is,
yeah. The
yeah,
spot that
yeah, yeah,
appeared. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. It turned out to be a dermatological condition that
Hmm.
is, easy to live with, not life threatening. But it sent me again, just into a whole other level of anxiety and depression. And, I was like, okay, now is the time for the meditation to come in handy. Now is the time that this is all gonna, come to the rescue.
It's like kind of like when
And
the boat has already tipped over. Where is my
yeah,
oar? Where was my oar?
right,
That's when I needed
right,
my oar, but it already tipped
right.
over.
And what meditation is supposed to do is kind of empty your mind of all these negative thoughts, at least enough for you to kind of elevate yourself above that
Mhm.
suffering and see a kind of higher reality. And I'm here to tell you, if you want to call me kind of somebody who failed in meditation, that's fine. In this particular situation, I found that the meditation kind of cleared out the cargo hold of my mind and let just all the more room for the one dominating
Oh.
catastrophic thought to just fill up the entire space. So, so yeah. So I'm not saying meditation doesn't work; it definitely helps. But as Dan himself says, it works much more as prophylaxis
Preventative. Yeah.
than as a band
Mm-hmm.
aid. All right,
Mm-hmm.
it's so I ended up doing other things. I went to a therapist. Okay, and we can talk about that. It obviously helps a lot of people. I thought it did some benefit. You know, it kind of depends on your therapist. It kind of depends on how seriously you take it. I probably didn't take it seriously enough. Um, and ultimately, I also went on some medications. And what I want to say is that, you know, that took a lot of, it took a lot, it was a big step for me.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, you know, what am I trying to say? It was tough because, on the one hand, it was just an admission that what I was trying already wasn't cutting it. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
The
goodness,
ego, the ego,
yeah,
the ego got bruised a little there. Mm-hmm.
the ego got bruised a lot because I
Mm-hmm.
am not the world's, I'm not a supermodel. I'm not an athlete. I don't have, a ton of money or fancy clothes. What's going for me, what gets me by is my brain and the words that come out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're telling me that that's what's broken, that, your number one, your superpower is actually a super weakness, that was tough. And, and again, um, then also I think like a lot of men, there's a machismo
Mm-hmm.
aversion to um, therapy in general, psychotropic medication in particular, um, that I kind of had to overcome. And there's a weird thing about it too, because as I mentioned in the book, I had done recreational drugs as a kid. I smoked marijuana, uh, dabbled in other stuff too. So you would think someone like that, and I was raised by chemists, by the way, who, believe in better living through chemistry. You'd think someone like that with that background would say, yeah, but, I'm putting chemicals in my brain to have a certain kind of experience, to whatever, improve on reality. Why wouldn't I do the same to kind of prevent me from having negative experiences? But nevertheless, that was a big hump for me to get over.
Mm-hmm.
But they help, you know, um, they made a difference. And again, I'm not in a position to tell anybody what to do. I'm in a position to listen more than to talk. But I would say, please don't let any kind of shame or embarrassment about that hinder you from doing what you need to do. I wish I had done it earlier for the sake of my family, for the sake of um, everybody who knew me. I wish I had done that earlier.
Thank you. Thank you for
Anyway, so
sharing that.
and yeah, yeah. No,
Mm.
it's I'm comfortable talking about it, but it's you got to own it. You've got to own that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Uh,
until you
anyway, so what
realize
ended up
what you
happening is I tried all these things. Yeah, and so I ended up kind of hopscotching around all these different things, whether or not it was, some diet, of course, exercise is a big thing, doing the meditation, doing the medication, doing therapy. And, so in the course of these years, I wouldn't necessarily be doing all of those things all the time. I kind of hopscotch around, and I found that worked for me. I have to be doing some of those things all the time to keep my act together. And I will also admit that during the pandemic, I haven't been as good about that as I should. Um, Recently, I've been trying to be better, but it's very simple for me. If I'm doing enough of those things, I can be on my A game, and if I'm not,
hmm
it's no guarantee whatsoever that I'm not going to slip.
Yeah, thank you. Now, what you were saying when you said about the fact that what you thought was your gift, like I got really moved in that moment when you mentioned that, like the aspect of your brain and the having to admit that you did need help in the wiring there in order to be able to help you with the stressors. Um,
Hmm.
that take a lot of guts, and so I think there's a lot of kudos you have to give yourself, because as hard as all that process was of having to admit you did step outside of your comfort zone quite a bit, even if maybe the timing was not the exact timing that you would have wished it, you still did it. And here you guys are still as as a family unit and so forth, even amongst all these different struggles that you went through. Now let's talk about a little
Yeah,
bit more of that, because as I was reading, I wanted to ask you guys, how old was Lydia? Was Lydia just like 3 or so when Sebastian was born? Is that
yeah.
her? Was
She
that
was
her age?
approximately 4 years older than Sebastian.
Or
Yeah. So right
how
now
was
she's
the
12 and he's 8. So
and he's okay. How was the dynamic of the focus? This is as a parent of also too myself. Um, how did it work with the dynamic of having so much focus in that period of years being towards one child when you still have a younger one? How did you guys navigate that journey as parents? Of making sure that she understood at such a young age the reasons of why her brother, and there's such beautiful little things there. I'll let the listeners, yeah, be able to read that, but little things that she did, like with her favorite toy, like her Thomas trains and those kind of things that she passed down to her brother, like just beautiful, beautiful, heartfelt moments for myself. At least when I was reading it, I just want to say that those just brought me lots of joy to see that. But yeah, how did you guys handle as parents that dynamic?
um yeah. So, Lydia um was just this fire hose of love and light and kind of this wonderful presence that kind of kept us up and kept us together. Um, but that's also a real responsibility, um, and it's a burden uh, that we didn't. Of course, we never said you have to be happy and
Mhm.
loving so that we can keep it together. But I mean, we all, I think, to a certain degree, kind of were depending on her for that. And Felicia, who deserves just all the credit in the world, was wonderful at explaining things to her, was wonderful at including her, was wonderful at making sure that she still got you know adequate attention and adequate love. I'm sure there's a mountain of research on the challenges that the healthy kid goes through
Mhm.
when there's a sick child who inevitably gets certain degree of attention and
Attention. Mhm.
um, focus, even though it's not the kind of attention that you would necessarily want, right? Getting stuck with needles and being in hospitals
Mhm.
and all that stuff. So so yeah, but she was great through it, and there was a time when we had to decide if we were going to actually go into transplant. It took us years to decide we were going to go through this process of transplantation, and that involved um, it had to ultimately involve moving to Duke in North Carolina because that's where the best and this really wonderful pediatric transplant unit is. And so the question was, do we really want to bring her down there?
Mm.
Are we going to be traumatizing her by subjecting her to all this ordeal? And it's interesting because the doctors were unequivocal that she needed to be there. We all needed to be there. And it was in part because they've seen these rather stunning, if you want to call it miraculous, we can use that word, instances where the presence of the healthy child has this remarkable, magical, demonstrable uh, effect on the health and the mood and the success rates of the patient. Um, and there are plenty of anecdotes that we heard about that, and then we experienced it ourselves. There's one day Sebastian was in the transplant unit. We can talk a little bit about what that experience is like if you want, but basically it involves
Mhm.
a lot of isolation and chemotherapy and suffering and all sorts of really intense medical procedures, handled beautifully by the professionals, but intense nonetheless. And he was just lying on his bed, you know, looking like um, looking real bad, and he didn't want to play, he didn't want to interact with anybody. And then his sister came in, and it was like he just woke up and pretended that the whole being sick thing was just let's pretend, and jumped on the
And
floor
act.
and started
Oh,
playing with her, and I couldn't believe it. And there's lots of stories like that. Now she's 12 years old and she's entering her teenage years, right? And so she's in a different phase of life and she's dealing with, the normal issues with that. So, what we want to do is, and again, this is something that I need to continue to work on. And I'm actually reading a book now at Felicia's recommendation on how to talk to kids so that they'll listen and how to listen so that they'll talk, which is a wonderful book.
yeah.
Just to,
That
so
is
that,
that the name of it? I'm writing it
yeah,
down. I have a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old.
yeah,
So how
um,
to talk to how to talk to kids so they will listen and how to listen so they will talk.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Because good intentions will get you some of the way, but really there are communication skills that I'm sure some people are just naturally born with, but some people, like myself, have to acquire. You know, I mean, we're all works in progress, especially me.
That thank you for sharing that. And the one of the things that also struck me when you now that you're talking about being at Duke in North Carolina, when you guys were there for a period of, was it 3 months for one of the time periods at least? How long did you guys actually move there for during? Because you had to be there for pre-testing, kind of all those things, then
Hmm.
the actual transplant. So there were several. So how long were you guys in North Carolina at
Right.
the total part?
Yeah. So they tell you to budget a year.
Okay.
And when I got that news, I mean, I did a double take. Okay. So
Yeah.
a whole year of our life is going to be devoted to this medical procedure. Answer, yes.
Yes. Mhm.
We had, so we had to kind of reconfigure and plan how we were going to, um, move ourselves down there for a year and deal with all the housing and the schooling and the work situations, all that stuff, which all lots of families have to deal with.
Mhm.
And our plan was to go down there in March of 2016 to do a meet and greet. Felicia had already gone down there earlier and met the team and done all the work really, including convincing me that it was the right thing to do. Um, so we were originally going to go down there just as a meet and greet in March of 2016 to check out some of these things and lay the groundwork. The week we were supposed to go down there, Sebastian got an infection. Well, I should say he got really sick. He had a very bad issue with his lungs, which we thought was an infection for a long time. And so I was like, okay, is he even safe to travel? They said, yeah, bring him down there. He needs to be down here. So we went down there thinking we were just going to be there for like 5 days. That was March 17th, 18th,
Mm.
around St. Patrick's Day. And we didn't come back until Thanksgiving.
Oh, wow.
It took us, they saw him and they said, okay, the wheels are coming off. We were going to transplant him later this year, but actually, we got to transplant him now.
Mm.
It's go time, make or break. And so we were there for basically 3 months, just getting him healthy enough to go into transplant because you have to clear the body of all infections and do 1,000 different diagnostic tests to make sure that the body can withstand the procedure. Then, when he was healthy enough to go into transplant, we went in. We were in the unit for about 2 months, which is, I would say, around average. Some kids do it quicker. A lot of kids take a lot longer.
Mhm.
And then when you get out, if you're lucky enough to get out, you have to stay within the immediate vicinity of the hospital for at least another, um, well, for us, it was what, another 4 months or so.
For
And then,
follow-ups and
yeah,
checkups.
yeah, and just daily check up, daily diagnostics, the blood counts, again, we can get into the whole
Mhm.
science of it if you want, but all sorts of additional, post transplant procedures to make sure that the new immune system, which they're building from scratch, basically,
Mhm.
takes and engrafts and grows, and there aren't any severe complications, which there often are. And then if you clear that hurdle, you can go home, but you still have to maintain that lifestyle basically for a full calendar year. And that's how it was.
And that's how it was. And but during that time, this is one of the things I also want to touch upon is if we can go over also not only the resources, the medical resources that you guys had in terms of all the doctors that you guys went to, and I know you talk about different doctors throughout it, some maybe not the right match for families or not the right bedside manner or things like that in the journey and so forth, but then the nurses and the staff, but also the people you reconnected when you guys lived when you moved to North Carolina. There were then people that you also used as your kind of core and support while you guys were there. And that was another part. I'm constant, like there's just things that like kind of bring up that was one of the things that also like warmed my heart, was seeing that those connections. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how they helped you also with Lydia being in this new space?
Certainly. So I was hesitant to go down to Duke because we didn't have a support system, right? We had a support system in New York. We have a
New
support
York.
system in other places where we have family. Washington, D.C. was one of them. But we didn't really know that many people in Duke. It was, however, again, Felicia, my wonderful and brilliant wife, strong wife, who said, "We're going to go there because that is unequivocally the best place for him to be." Transplantation is a very, specialized thing to begin with, and transplanting a kid with this rare disease is its own separate protocol. So really, there's only like two or three places in the entire country that have strong track records of doing this. Plus, he didn't even have a good match. We had to use a special kind of transplantation using unrelated umbilical cord blood. So we were like really right at the edge of uh, this the realm of feasibility here. So we got to go to Duke. And for her, you talked about faith earlier. For her, it was both an act of rigorous research. It wasn't just, blindly stepping
Blind.
over
Hmm.
off the diving board. She'd done her rigorous research, and she also had the power of her faith that God was going to give her the strength for the journey. And and she was correct. When we got down there, um, we were very, very fortunate to have reconnect with friends. I had one friend that I hadn't seen since college, who had coincidentally moved to North Carolina. Her name was Tina Merrill
Oh,
Bookwalter.
that's where the Tina. That's why I knew that. Like I messed up Tim's name. I said Dan. I said Tim, but that was because of Tina's name in the thing.
Yep.
Okay, so Tina,
And
uh-huh.
Felicia had a friend from originally from
Childhood.
Chicago named Jessica
Hmm.
Tang, who was actually in nursing school at Duke. And you'd think that people like that would help you out in some marginal way, right? You haven't seen people reconnecting, people need, so you might lend them a car seat or help them with recommendations for schools or something. But the degree to which these two women and additional people who we didn't even know, who just came out of the woodwork, who just gave of themselves with a degree of generosity, a degree of super altruism, and not just like one gesture, but like regular thing for months, um, was just breathtaking. In the course of your life, you're going to find many people who disappoint you, right? People will let you down. I've certainly let people down, but it's just wonderful to see that that's not always the case. Some people will surprise you on the upside in some of your moments of most desperate vulnerability and need. And if you have the strength or the need to say, you know what, I need help. I can't I can't do this by myself. We were very, very blessed to have all sorts of people come and give of themselves, for us, but also for a child that they didn't know at all.
Hmm.
And
It's
and I'll
beautiful.
be grateful for that for the rest of my life.
And I'm sure that those type of friendships, even though they rekindled, I guess, during the situation, I'm sure that they've maintained, because you guys went through something so hard also together in in those months that you guys lived there. I'm sure that those friendships have probably strengthened too, even though they hadn't that you guys hadn't been in contact with them for so long. So that's wonderful. Now let's talk, going back to friendships. How did other friendship dynamics shift um, during the times that he was sick, as well as just in general, because you guys did have to kind of live in this bubble per se to some extent too, with making sure that you were not exposed to certain things, right? And runny nose this or that, like, so how did you guys juggle that with situations like birthdays or invitations that you might have, and so forth?
Yeah, well, that was sad in a lot of ways. Um, you know, Sebastian couldn't really have friends for a while, right? There's an age where kids are just learning to walk and they're putting everything in their mouths and they're touching everyone, and that's very dangerous for a kid with an immune deficiency. And we had friends that wanted to bond with him and wanted to arrange play dates, and that happened. But it was so easy for it to get disrupted, right? If one of the kids, heaven forfend, has the slightest sniffle, we have to call it off. Or if other a whole set of circumstances don't line up perfectly, you can't do it, or you have to do it under constrained um, restrictions. And as a result, for years, Sebastian's best friends were his Thomas
Hmm.
the Tank Engine train set, I should say. He had this big collection, and Felicia would spend hours on the floor with him, voicing the different characters, and they kind of created a whole world for him that was a substitute for genuine human contact with his peers. And it was beautiful and touching in many ways, but also very heartbreaking.
Yes.
Um, and we had, again, and I think a lot of people can relate to this because of COVID now, right? We all have gotten a good taste of what it's like to live in a state of kind of compromised immune vulnerability,
Mhm.
and what that means, what social distancing means. You know, Social distancing is a nice word and it sounds safe and it's something we all have to accept, but it's terrible.
Mhm.
Social distancing is terrible.
Yeah, the
Um,
emotional impacts it has, and
yeah, it's not a good thing. It's something we should. I mean, I don't want to preach, but it is something that we should try to get past as soon as possible.
mhm.
Um, you know,
I,
I'll
I
just say one
agree.
little thing.
Like,
My since the book was written, I finished the book in March of 2020, and it's
oh,
coming
right
out now.
before. Oh, did
Right
you?
when COVID was kicking in,
Yeah, right
and
before this. Hmm.
one of the things that happened in the year, my mom died um, in
Oh, I
this
didn't know
past
that.
October. And first of all, she had a wonderful, long, full life. She was at peace at the end. Um, but I'll tell you this: at the end, she didn't want to talk, and she didn't. She was religious, but she didn't really feel much of a need to pray. What she wanted was just to be touched. She
Mm.
wanted to be held, and it's just very sad that a lot of people can't do that now. That was one
Were
of the
you?
nice things about being in Sebastian's transplant room. You know, um, Felicia got into foot massage and reflexology, and you could always you could always just at least hold him. Um, that makes a huge difference.
Were you able? I'm sorry to hear about your mom, and it's so recent too.
Sure.
My mom passed away as well, but were you able to, because of the situations, were you guys able to be with her? Were you able to be with her during this time, even with COVID, by chance,
Um, well, I'll
under the
say a lot of people
circumstances?
have had it a lot worse. The book is
Mm,
actually dedicated to everybody who's had it worse, and there's plenty of people
mm,
that had it worse. So, uh, with my mom's situation, um, again, she had cancer, and she'd had cancer for years.
mm-hmm.
But she was doing quite well with it. She'd gone down to Costa Rica. My mother's Costa Rican, and she was in the habit of spending the winters in Costa Rica. And she was down there last winter, and she was supposed to come back in April, but then COVID happened, and they shut down the airport. You know, Nobody was getting in
Yeah,
and out.
they did the
And
same in Colombia. Yeah,
yeah,
they
yeah.
closed it completely.
And so we were in touch, and she was fine. But then in the summer, this is not COVID related, but in the summer, her cancer took a real turn for the worse, and she was minimizing it. Like many mothers, she didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to kind of lay her problems on us. She knew we had our own stuff. But then it became clear that she was in a bad way. So we had to get down there, which was this whole huge, bureaucratic nightmare getting there. And then when we got there, she was in the hospital, and it's a good hospital. I'm not cracking on uh, Costa Rican medicine, but they had their own COVID restrictions, so we could only see her like 5 minutes a day, and she was in a room with
Mm.
6 other people. Um, but we were able to. They finally determined that they couldn't do anything for her, and they released her on a Thursday. We got her home, and she just kept saying how happy and thankful it was for her to be home. And the doctors told us that she was going to last más o menos cuatro
Mm.
semanas más, 4 more weeks.
Mm.
So we were geared up. My sister and I were there. We were geared up to, kind of be with her to the end. And she died the next day. Más o
Wow.
menos turned out to be one day. And I think, honestly, she was ready to go. She just wanted to be at home with her kids. And
Mm.
so, yes, it was COVID related. Yes, it was, and the logistics of it were
During,
COVID
yeah, yeah,
related.
during this time. Hmm.
But and it was tough. But I'll tell you this: it's dealing with the loss of a parent is anybody will tell you very tough. But at least it's somewhat natural
Mm.
compared
The
to dealing
order of
with,
life. Hmm.
yeah, the seriously sick or fatally sick child. So
Yeah.
I on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give my experience with my mother's passing an 8, 8.5. You talk to other people, which I have since then. You find out these really heartbreaking stories. Yeah, my dad had a heart attack, and my mom said I didn't need to come because he was getting better. And then 2 days later, he died, and his final words were, "Where are my kids?" You
Oh
know,
gosh.
my mom got sick in Los Angeles, and so I got on a plane in Philadelphia, and I got off the plane, and I had a voicemail saying that my mom had died while I was crossing the Rockies. So all of these terrible things that can happen with the usual regret, not being able to be there for them, or not being able to say what you need to say. I don't have to live with any of that.
Hmm.
So I'm blessed in that way.
I'm so glad you guys were able to fly there and be there with her. It's just, it does make a difference in the grief process, as well as what you mentioned to before. I mean, you have been experiencing grief in other shapes and forms in your life, all these years, as well, with the diagnosis and all the stress. So it kind of builds a muscle too, to kind of learn. And that's what I always tell people: don't compare like how somebody deals with one grief experience to yourself, because you do not know everything else they've had to experience in their life to be able to handle, quote unquote, this situation differently than maybe you do, because they might have gone through a completely different journey and have different skills and different tools to navigate that. And you for sure have definitely developed a lot of those through the last few years with Sebastian's journey, for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, I tried a lot of things, um,
Hmm.
not just the modalities of self help that we talked about before, but kind of mindsets and philosophies.
Yes.
Um, I tried denial. That didn't last too long. I tried stoicism, right? You
Mm.
know, I'm going to underreact to everything. I'm not going to let anything jam me up. I'm going to be a rock in the face of all this chaos. Um, you know, thank you, sir. May I have another? Um, and that didn't last too long for me either. Um, it it is I think, a good mindset for like a soldier. Um,
Hmm.
Soldiers need to have a certain amount of stoicism. Um, for parents, or at least for me, it didn't last very long as a functional modality of coping. And
Hmm.
ultimately, and again, I want to thank my wife for this, among others, but um, and the meditators too. Um, you have to give suffering its place. You have to accommodate it, and you have to understand that suffering can actually have purpose. Um, by definition, suffering is not going to make you happy, but suffering can give your life meaning. Suffering can teach you things. Um, and we all have certain limits. We shouldn't necessarily go out and gorge ourselves on suffering. But when it comes to you, um, you should, again, give it its respect, give it its place, and see what you can take from
Mm. That is perfect for us to wrap up with that. I want you to share with us, if you can, then in that same line, then what have you discovered in your life that now has completely different meaning than when it did before you going through this? Like what shifted in you? You work a lot, and that was one of the ways to at some point in your journey too. You probably dove into work as one of the ways of coping too. But
it.
what are some of the things that have changed it within you and around you from seeing that feeling going through this suffering? And of course now, by the way, Sebastian's healthy, and I know you guys probably still have to do other protocol and so forth as being a transplant child at this point, right? You still have to kind of be cautious too.
Yeah, he has to have yearly kind of checkups to, monitor if there's long-term organ damage from the chemo that it was part of the transplant. But um, but otherwise, he's in perfect health. In fact, he's got a a bespoke, you know, Lamborghini uh, immune system
Mm,
that is really tip top. So that's one thing that we don't have to worry about.
that's good.
And again, I want to answer your question,
Yes.
but I just have to say, I'm not I'm not comfortable giving the kind of I've been to the mountaintop
No.
and come down with the sacred knowledge uh, kind of
You're not a
spiel.
sage. I'm not saying you're a sage. You're just
Yeah.
a person that's gone through hard. What has it done for you? Like what little things? It doesn't have to be something big, but like again, I named this grief, gratitude, and the gray in between because I do feel like, just like you said, you mentioned the word suffering. For me, it's like, again, with grief, with anything we go through, that component of gratitude does come from the aspect of all the things we grow from going through hard things. We grow. And again, it doesn't mean that you're like, whoa, yeah, but there's something in which shifts and makes. So, what has happened in your life?
Well, you touched on a couple things, which is that one thing is true, and I need to be reminded of this all the time, um, that the ego. I mean, you need some sort of ego to function, right? You need some sort
Hmm.
of ego to survive in the world, but the ego can often be a real source of evil. It can be the source of all sorts of hellish decisions and miscalculations and overreactions. So that's one thing. If there's one thing that will humble you, if there's one thing that will, teach you to kind of try to grow by becoming small, it's going through an intense medical procedure with your child. Um, Another thing that it really taught me, is that it gave you a different perspective on faith. And I'm not here to tell you that, I found Jesus and he's personally saved me and stuff like that. What I will tell you is that um, I have a lot more profound respect for people who do practice faith, not because I necessarily think they've got all the answers to the big cosmic questions, but because it works for so many people who are at the end of their rope, who need strength for the journey, who realize that they are at their own limits. They need something more. We all, at certain times, need something more. And faith provides that for people. So when you encounter people who are serious about the religion, you know, whereas, I might have been inclined to dismiss them as, superstitious or closed minded, um, I shouldn't think that way. They're often people who are just dealing with more than they can handle, and they're turning to their faith for some sort of strength, right? I mean, a lot of people turn to substance abuse,
Hmm.
right? I mean, it's funny. Karl Marx said religion was the opiate of the masses. Well, now we know that it turns out no,
Hmm.
opioids are the opiate of the masses, and they're destroying a
True.
lot of lives. So
Hmm.
religion is a wonderful and beautiful um, source of strength for many, many people. Whether or not every single word in a sacred text should be read literally is a separate question, which I'm not expert enough to expound on. But that's really not the question. So that's another thing. And then the final thing is just an amazing, intimate experience with the profound power of medical science. And, you know, again, partly because I was arrogant, was I wasn't interested in, when I was growing up, in fact, until I was 40, I hadn't had any medical health issues. I write about this. I thought of doctors like auto mechanics, right? And by the way, auto mechanics are a great, profession. I'm not ripping on auto mechanics. I'm just saying when you go to an auto mechanic, you think, okay, how long is this going to take and what's it going to cost me? And that's basically the attitude I had to doctors, right? Um, but then when I saw what some of these people can do and their amazing skills and their amazing compassion, and also, I want to say, their amazing tolerance for risk. I mean, some of the stuff that they were doing down there, it's not too much hyperbole to say it was real rock and roll. They
Mm.
were, um, and a lot of American medical centers, broadly speaking, are considerably more buccaneering than other parts of the world. Um, and that's one of the reasons why people from all over the world come to
Fly here.
places
Hmm.
like Duke, like the NIH, like several other very impressive medical centers I can name, to see what they can do and how their field is growing so quickly. It's breathtaking. I mean, again, to talk about something that everybody can relate to, people, we came up with a vaccine for COVID-19 in 9 months using messenger RNA. I mean, you, I'm not saying people should, read all the PubMed articles about it, but you just read a couple, basic layman's terms articles about how that vaccine came about. It is mind blowing. And I think oftentimes we're very dismissive of Western medicine or we're dismissive of big pharma, right? It's the most hated industry in the world. Um, but some of the things that are getting done are really worthy of our respect and
Respect.
support and humility.
Thank you. That says a lot. Now, how about in terms of the dynamic and your relationship after you guys even going through something so hard? How did you and Felicia the bond now? You guys have been through probably the biggest test you probably would go through in your life. So, how did that dynamic also then strengthen and shift in this with this tough time that you went through?
It's a real challenge. I talk about it in some detail in the book. Um, we were kind of welded together by this experience.
Mhm.
We've needed help from time to time. The pandemic in the last year, has, kind of brought its own set of challenges. Felicia was,
Absolutely.
um, and it's really heartbreaking for a lot of women, who have all these dreams and goals and, all this wonderful potential and brilliance. And the circumstances of the pandemic have conspired to, kind of force them to become,
At home, be at home.
teachers and
Or even be at
homemakers.
home because of the children not being at school,
Yeah,
some women having to leave the workforce
the
because of
knock-on
that.
effects of that.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so we're still together, and I hope we'll continue to be for the long term. We still have issues. I still have issues. I still have stuff I need to work on, um, but I'm willing to do the work. And we're we're gonna, we've got these two beautiful kids, and um, they deserve um, the best that we can be.
And I love that you said that you're willing to do the work because you just had said before all this, again, you were a skeptic to the therapy and all these kind of things and in medicine and such. But now that you've seen, whatever, what is it called? Um,
Medications, yeah.
medication, yeah. So it's a big that's a big growth as well there. And then now you know which ore to get, which what depending on what you need and to be able to row this family boat afloat as at least for now, because again we all are presented with different challenges at different times and then we need a new set of tools at that point. But you've definitely gathered a few through the years.
and it's also the discipline, which is again,
Yeah.
something that, like I said, I kind of know what works, but
Uh-huh.
knowing it and actually doing it and
True.
like making the time for it. I mean, there's a number of points of the book where Sebastian's healed and I'm feeling better, so I think everything's fine. I can just kind of pretend that I'm perfectly okay now, and that was not the case. Um, and even in the last, year, this pandemic has not been, you know,
Mm,
easy for us. We spent six
mhm.
years of some kind of quarantine. So on the one hand, we kind of knew the drill, but on the other hand, it's like, really, our
What
reward for 6 years
again?
of this is a
Right.
seventh year,
Yeah.
and it's had some real impact on us. And we, like everybody else, have to really kind of take stock of um, the realities of it and just hunker down and try to do whatever's necessary to make it through, um, including me. I mean, this past year, I kind of, because I was worried about losing work, right? Like a lot of people have. So I just kind of said, I'll take on as much work as I possibly can because in a month I might be out of work. Um, and so I ended up doing a lot of work and providing for the family. So that's one thing we don't have to worry about. But all the other stuff, my program, working out, eating right, talking to people, getting therapy, that
Other
all
things fell through the cracks. Yeah.
well, I've been slipping on that. Okay.
Mhm.
And here I got a book coming out now saying, that I figured it all out. um, so, that, that pandemic stuff jams you up, and
It
you
does.
just have to, you know, remind yourself that, that it's not easy, man. Life keeps coming at you. Life keeps coming at you. And it's your
Yeah, and
job
you
to try to hold it together for the people that you care about.
but one of the things that a lot of us have as human beings that have been through a lot, and for sure this year, a lot of us have developed this even more is resilience, right? So the we go through hard things, yet they call it having a rubber butt. You kind of fall back, just bounce back up, So that is one of the biggest, probably virtues, I guess, that we'll develop through these years and that our children will have for sure is a lot more resilience through these hardships that have happened. Now, let's tell a little bit more about the book, where people can find it. March 2nd is the official release. And
Yeah.
so share about that. And I'll share the link on the I'm releasing it right before your release. So when people hear this, they'll be able to buy it in just a few days later.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I properly thanked you for having me on the show and helping me talk a little bit about our experience and about the book. Right. So the book is called More Than You Can Handle: um, A Rare Disease, a Family in Crisis, and the Breakthrough Medicine That Cured the Incurable. It's published by Avery Publishing, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. And I have to say, the team there has been so helpful and patient and tolerant and supportive. And so now, yeah, it's available now on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the regular places you buy books. Um, I encourage you to put on a mask and go to a real bookstore and um,
Support some, yeah.
support some
It,
local bookstores. Make sure you
yeah.
sanitize your hands before and after. But it should be available there too. And I'm going to this weekend. I want to put together like a little website, so when people Google it, there'll be like a page that will have some more information about that.
Yeah, I was trying to find you and Felicia on even Instagram because I'm like, okay, when I start posting about it, how do I tag them? But I can only tag Avery Books. I'm like, I can't find you guys.
Oh,
So
really?
I don't
Yeah.
know how to
I mean, I'm
find
a
you because
Facebook
maybe,
guy. I could do some Twitter. I need to do Instagram. Thank you for that's
okay.
another thing I have to do this weekend is get my Instagram act together.
Yeah, if you do,
Um,
then that could I could tag you. But it's been
Great.
such an honor chatting with you, and I'm so grateful that Casey and Maloney at Avery Books contacted me and put this together, and being able to read your book, learn about your family, and now being able to talk to you and um, and your resilience and your family's resilience, and just so grateful that Sebastian and Lydia are healthy and that you guys are well. So thank you. Miguel.
Absolutely. The
Mi-
I was the one thing I'll say about the book is that obviously it's my story and it's very intimate and very personal, but I did try very hard to write it with bearing in mind that the readers have a million other things they could be doing with their time. So it's written in such a way that hopefully the reader will find it like worth their time, um, and engaging. I mean, you tell me. I mean, is
It
it
is. I told you I only have I told you I couldn't finish it because I was reading it on PDF, so I had to sit on my computer to read it. But now I have my hard copy as of today that I received in the mail, so I'll be able to finish it. But it's engaging because of, I mean, as I told you, there's all the little things I was able to pull out and share here while we were talking, because there are these heartfelt moments too, as well as just so much learning. Like I learned a lot of slangs, by the way, of all these like parent with us, like all these different are they called slangs? Siglas. What are
like
siglas?
acronyms and
Acronyms.
yeah,
Thank you. That's the
parents
word,
with a
not
sick plask?
sigla.
Yeah,
Yeah, puask, and then huddle. Like the HOD. Have
HODL, hodl.
yeah, huddle. What
Yep.
was it? Have that. What does that one mean?
It means hang on for dear life.
Hang on for dear life. Yeah. So I learned a lot of different acronyms in the book. Um, and then just really stepping into the perspective of being that type, parent with this. And I don't have that dynamic as of now, but being able to be in your shoes, I was able to feel that in this journey. And again, congratulations. And again, it's your first book. So it's very exciting, I'm sure, too. And nerve wracking, too. I'm sure everything at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, uh, there's a singular feeling of like having a long string of words with your name attached and you can't change a single one of them. And of course, I read the book, I see nothing but its imperfections, and
No,
there's some definite things that I need to change and correct,
no,
and I'll do that in the paperback. But
no, just
yeah,
let it, just release. This is even just with the podcast. That's one of the things I learned. The moment it's out there, like sometimes don't if I listen when I listen back again, is just to be able to know what to write for the. Oops, sorry, I'm like hitting my microphone. I'm talking with my hands. Um, for the little info on the podcast itself, that's when I re-listen. But I at the beginning, it would be so judgmental of like, oh no, I laughed there. I should have not interrupted the person there, and so judgmental of it. So, but then had to learn to just release. It's out. It's gonna have an effect on people's lives. That I think is the most important part. All the other little things that you want to change, those are just the producer in you wanting to to keep on fixing it. So thank you once again, Miguel.
it's kind of you to say. And again, all my compassion and love for your audience and anybody who's dealing with anything, remotely like what we've been through. I know there's lots of people out there doing it quietly, loudly, publicly, privately. Um, you know, the book is for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Miguel. Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.